The rain came down in sheets that November evening, the kind of cold, relentless downpour that turned city streets into rivers and soaked through every layer of clothing within seconds. Natalie Parker stood in the hallway of her sixth-floor walk-up, staring at the bright orange eviction notice taped to her door, her hands trembling around the handles of two reusable grocery bags. The flickering fluorescent light overhead buzzed and sputtered, casting her shadow in jagged, intermittent bursts against the peeling wallpaper. The locks had been changed. Her key, still clutched uselessly in her fist, was nothing more than a piece of metal now, worthless. Beside the door sat a cardboard box, soggy and collapsing at the corners, containing what the landlord had deemed her most essential possessions: a framed photo of her parents, her laptop, a few books. The box was already disintegrating from the rain that had blown in through the broken window at the end of the hall, and Natalie felt something inside her chest crack in a similar fashion. She set the grocery bags down carefully, as if the eggs and bread inside still mattered, as if she'd have anywhere to store them in an hour. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. Rent reminders, probably. Or perhaps another apologetic email from a potential client who'd decided to go with someone else, someone more established, someone whose ex-boyfriend hadn't spent the last year systematically destroying her professional reputation. Natalie closed her eyes and let her head fall back against the wall. The paint was cold against her skull. She could hear Mrs. Chen's television through the door across the hall, the familiar theme song of a game show she'd heard 1,000 times. Normal life, continuing on, oblivious to the fact that hers had just collapsed entirely. She couldn't call Priya. Her best friend had already loaned her money twice in the past 3 months, had offered her couch so many times that Natalie had started avoiding her calls out of sheer shame. She scrolled through her contacts anyway, thumb hovering over names, discarding each one. High school friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Professional contacts who'd gone silent after Tyler's sabotage. Her cousin in Seattle who had 3 kids and barely enough room as it was. Then there was Tyler's name. He'd texted last week. Checking in, he'd said. "I heard things have been rough. If you need anything..." Her stomach turned. She'd rather sleep on the street. The thought had barely formed when she realized it might actually come to that. It was 43 degrees and raining, and she had $200 in her bank account and nowhere to go. Natalie grabbed the disintegrating box, wedged it under one arm, and picked up the grocery bags. The walk down 6 flights of stairs felt like a descent into some new circle of hell, each step taking her further from the life she'd been clinging to and closer to a reality she wasn't ready to face. The rain hit her the moment she pushed through the building's front door. Within seconds, she was drenched, her auburn hair plastered to her face, water running down her neck and soaking through her canvas jacket. The cardboard box gave up entirely, splitting at the bottom and dumping her belongings onto the wet sidewalk. The frame cracked, glass scattering. Her laptop, thankfully in its case, hit the concrete with a sickening thud. For a moment, she just stood there in the rain, staring at the wreckage of her life spread across the pavement. Then she laughed. It was either that or scream, and she was too tired for screaming. She salvaged what she could, shoving items into the grocery bags, and started walking. The 24-hour diner 3 blocks away seemed as good a destination as any, but as she passed the Grandview Hotel, its warm lights spilling onto the rain-slicked street, she made an impulsive decision. The lobby would be warm. They had Wi-Fi. She could sit in one of those expensive armchairs and pretend she belonged long enough to figure out her next move. The doorman gave her a skeptical look, but didn't stop her. Inside, the hotel was all marble and soft lighting, the kind of place where each flower arrangement probably cost more than her former rent. Natalie headed straight for the courtesy coffee station near the concierge desk, poured herself a cup with shaking hands, and tried to look purposeful as she made her way toward a quiet corner. That's when she saw him. He sat alone at a table near the bar, a glass of something amber beside him, his attention fixed on the windows and the rain beyond. Dark hair, professionally styled but slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. Sharp jawline. A suit that even Natalie's untrained eye recognized as expensive, the kind that was tailored to fit perfectly. He looked exhausted in a way that expensive suits couldn't hide, the kind of tired that came from the inside. She wouldn't have approached him. She wouldn't have even registered his existence beyond a passing observation that attractive, wealthy men frequented expensive hotel bars. But her laptop bag caught on the corner of his table as she tried to navigate past with her armload of soggy possessions, and her coffee, already precariously balanced, tipped and splashed across the marble surface, a few drops landing on the leather portfolio beside his glass. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." The words tumbled out as she lunged forward, trying to catch the cup, only succeeding in knocking her grocery bag off her shoulder. A can of soup rolled across the floor. "I'm so sorry. I'll just—" "It's fine." His voice stopped her frantic scrambling. Low, measured, with an undertone of something she couldn't quite identify. He was already reaching for napkins, dabbing at the portfolio with an efficiency that spoke of someone used to handling minor crises. Really, no harm done. Natalie retrieved the soup can, her face burning with humiliation. Up close, he was even more striking. Steel gray eyes that should have been cold, but somehow weren't, at least not in this moment. He was watching her with an expression that was part curiosity, part concern. "You're soaking wet," he observed. Yes, it's raining." Brilliant conversation, Natalie. Truly sparkling. "Here," he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down before you drop something else." "I couldn't. I've already ruined your evening." "My evening was already ruined. You're just adding variety." There was the faintest hint of humor in his voice. He signaled to a passing waiter. "Coffee, actually hot, and in a cup that isn't from the courtesy station." Natalie should have declined, should have gathered her dignity and her soup can and left. But she was cold and wet and so tired her bones ached, and the chair looked incredibly comfortable. And something in his expression made her feel like maybe, just for a moment, she didn't have to pretend everything was fine. She sat. 2 weeks later, Natalie stood in front of the full-length mirror in what was now technically her bedroom, though calling it merely a bedroom felt like calling the ocean a puddle. The guest suite in Julian Westfield's penthouse was larger than her entire former apartment, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like a kingdom laid out for inspection. The dress had arrived that morning in a box so elegant she'd been afraid to open it. Midnight blue silk that draped in ways she hadn't known fabric could drape, with a neckline that was sophisticated rather than revealing. The price tag had been discreetly removed, which was probably for the best. She didn't want to know how many months of her former rent clung to her body. Her reflection looked like a stranger. Hair professionally styled into soft waves instead of her usual messy bun. Makeup applied by someone who actually knew what they were doing, enhancing the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. Even her freckles, which she'd spent her teenage years trying to hide, somehow looked intentional now, like carefully placed accessories. She felt like a fraud. The past 2 weeks had been surreal. That first night, sitting in Julian's car as rain hammered the windows, she'd listened to his proposition with a mix of disbelief and desperate calculation. He needed someone to pretend to be his girlfriend for 8 weeks, just long enough to satisfy the trustees of his father's company that he was stable and settled. In return, she'd get a room in his penthouse, $5,000 a month as a consulting fee for her design work, and her freedom back. No strings, separate bedrooms, a business arrangement, nothing more. She'd signed the contract the next morning, her hand barely shaking as she put her name next to his on the crisp legal paper Owen Fletcher, his lawyer, had prepared. Owen had kind eyes and the rumpled appearance of someone who cared more about substance than style, and he'd looked at her with something like sympathy as he explained the terms. 8 weeks, a handful of public appearances. Maintain the illusion. The penthouse itself was beautiful in a way that felt almost sterile. Minimalist furniture, carefully curated art, everything in shades of gray and white and chrome. It was the home of someone who lived in it, but didn't actually live, if that made any sense. The only personal touch she'd found was a photograph on his desk in the study. Julian, maybe 10 years younger, standing beside an older man who had to be his father. Both were smiling, but the expression on Julian's face held a lightness she hadn't seen in the man she'd come to know. They'd spent the 2 weeks in careful preparation, dinner twice at quiet restaurants where he'd taught her the names of business associates she'd need to remember, an afternoon going through photo albums, him explaining family history in a voice that grew quieter when he talked about his mother, who died when he was 12. A painful hour spent crafting a story about how they'd met that was close enough to the truth to be believable. Hotel lobby, chance encounter, coffee. What surprised her was how easy he was to talk to once the initial awkwardness faded. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and an unexpected thoughtfulness in the way he listened. When she'd mentioned her parents, he hadn't offered empty platitudes. He'd just nodded, his eyes reflecting an understanding that came from his own losses. Still, he maintained a professional distance. Their interactions had clear boundaries. He left for work before she woke up most mornings, came home late. They occupied the same space, but moved through it like planets in separate orbits, occasionally intersecting but never colliding. Until tonight. A soft knock on her door made her jump. "Natalie, the car's here." She opened the door to find Julian standing in the hallway, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. He'd always been handsome in that sharp, untouchable way, but tonight, he was devastating. Black tuxedo that fit him like it had been grown rather than sewn, white shirt that made his gray eyes look almost silver in the low light. His dark hair was styled back, revealing the angles of his face, and his expression when he saw her, something flickered there, gone so fast she might have imagined it. He stopped, cleared his throat. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." She grabbed the small clutch that had come with the dress, holding it like a shield. "What's the play tonight?" "The company's annual charity gala. About 200 people, most of whom I can't stand." His mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "We've been dating for 6 weeks. We're comfortable with each other, but not overly demonstrative. If anyone asks how we met, we stick to the hotel story. And if Victoria corners you, don't take the bait. You've mentioned her. Several times, actually. Each mention accompanied by a tension in his shoulders that spoke volumes about their complicated history. In the elevator down to the parking garage, Natalie caught their reflection in the mirrored walls. They looked like they belonged together, like one of those couples in magazines who attended benefits and summered in places with names she couldn't pronounce. The illusion was perfect. If only her racing heart would cooperate. The gala was held at the Greystone, a historic building that had been converted into an event space for people who had too much money and needed somewhere to display it. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, flower arrangements that probably cost more than she used to make in a month. Natalie felt the eyes on them the moment they walked in, the weight of scrutiny and speculation. Julian's hand found the small of her back, warm through the thin silk of her dress. "Breathe," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. "You're doing fine." They moved through the crowd like dancers who'd rehearsed the steps. He introduced her to business partners whose names she'd memorized, board members who assessed her with sharp eyes and sharper smiles. She laughed at appropriate moments, asked polite questions, played the role of the charming girlfriend with an ease that surprised her. What surprised her more was that it didn't feel entirely like playing. When Julian's hand rested on her waist as they spoke with a silver-haired woman who ran the city's largest investment firm, the touch felt natural. When he leaned close to whisper a comment about the hideous ice sculpture near the bar, her answering laugh was genuine. And when someone asked how they'd met, the way he looked at her as he told the story, there was something in his eyes that made her forget they were lying. "Julian, darling." The voice cut through the ambient noise like a knife through silk. Natalie turned to see a woman approaching, tall and perfectly assembled in a white gown that probably cost more than a car. Platinum blonde hair in an elegant updo, ice blue eyes, and a smile that didn't reach anywhere near those eyes. Julian's hand tightened on Natalie's waist. "Victoria." You didn't mention you were bringing someone. Victoria's gaze raked over Natalie with the efficiency of a scanner, cataloging and dismissing in the same sweep. How refreshing. You're so normal. The word landed like a slap, dressed up as a compliment. Natalie felt her spine straighten, years of dealing with difficult clients rising to the surface. I'll take that as a compliment. Normal is underrated. Oh, I'm sure. Victoria's smile sharpened. I don't believe we've met. I'm Victoria Hastings. My family and Julian's have been close for years. Very close. Natalie Parker. She offered her hand, gratified when her voice remained steady. Julian's girlfriend. How long has this been going on? The question was directed at Julian, possessive and challenging. 6 weeks, he said smoothly. Not that it's really your concern, Victoria. 6 weeks. Victoria's laugh was like wind chimes made of ice. How serious could that possibly be? Julian, you remember what we discussed at the summer benefit about expectations. The ride back to the penthouse was silent, thick with unspoken words. Natalie stared out the window at the city lights blurring past, replaying Victoria's words in her head. Expectations. The way she'd said it, like Julian was a possession that had been temporarily misplaced. The way he'd responded, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it, telling Victoria that his personal life was no longer up for family negotiation. And then he'd kissed Natalie's temple, a gesture so casual and yet so deliberate that it had felt like a brand. Mine, it said to Victoria and everyone watching. The touch had been brief, but Natalie's skin still tingled where his lips had pressed. Inside the penthouse, she kicked off the torturous heels and padded barefoot into the kitchen, suddenly desperate for something normal. Tea. She'd make tea like this was a regular night and not one where she'd been assessed and found wanting by a woman who clearly believed Julian belonged to her. She was waiting for the kettle to boil when he appeared in the doorway, bow tie undone, hanging loose around his neck. He'd shrugged out of his jacket and rolled his shirt sleeves to his elbows. The formal armor was coming off piece by piece, revealing the exhausted man underneath. I should have warned you about her. His voice was rough with something that might have been anger or regret or both. That she thinks you're going to marry her? Yeah, that would have been helpful. Natalie pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet, the mismatched ceramic ones she'd brought from her old apartment, incongruous against the sleek minimalism of his kitchen. Our families have an arrangement. He moved to the island, leaned against it. Or they think they do. My father and Richard Hastings built their companies together. It's always been assumed that Victoria and I would eventually... He broke off, jaw tight. I've never agreed to it, but I've never outright refused either. And that's been enough for them to keep planning. And now my father is in a care facility, barely remembers who I am most days, and the trustees he appointed are using his condition as leverage. The words came out clipped, each one edged with frustration. The company transfers fully to me after the New Year's gala, but only if they're satisfied I'm stable enough to run it. Victoria's father is one of those trustees. The kettle whistled. Natalie poured water over tea bags, the familiar ritual giving her something to do with her hands. So if you marry her, the families merge the companies. If you don't, if I don't prove I've moved on, that I'm settled with someone else, they'll use my bachelor lifestyle as evidence of instability. Never mind that I've been running the company successfully for 6 years. He accepted the mug she offered, their fingers brushing briefly. Richard wants control. My Uncle Edward wants control. The only way I keep what my father built is to show them I'm not the irresponsible playboy they've decided I am. Are you? A playboy? She tried to picture it. The man she'd spent 2 weeks with went to bed at reasonable hours and drank green tea in the mornings. I was, maybe, when I was 25, before my father got sick, before I realized the company would be mine and everything that meant. He stared into his mug like it held answers. I dated, nothing serious, attended parties because it was expected, and Victoria was always there, always waiting, always so certain that eventually I'd realize she was the logical choice. Is she the logical choice? His eyes met hers, something fierce and dark moving in their depths. I won't be forced into anything. Not marriage, not merging companies, not giving up what my father spent his life building because a group of old men think they know what's best. Natalie wrapped her hands around her mug, absorbing its warmth. Tell me about your father. The real story, not the rehearsed version. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set his mug down and moved to the windows, staring out at the glittering city below. William Westfield, brilliant businessman, terrible at showing emotion, loved my mother so much that when she died, part of him died too. His reflection in the glass looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. He taught me everything about running a company, nothing about living a life. I'm sorry. He's still alive, technically, but the man I knew, the one who built all of this, he gestured vaguely at the penthouse, the view, the empire beyond. He's been gone for 3 years. What's left is fragments, moments of clarity where he remembers my name, followed by hours where he thinks I'm someone from his childhood, or worse, doesn't recognize me at all. The pain in his voice was so raw it made her chest ache. She moved to stand beside him, their reflections side by side in the dark glass. That's why this matters so much. The company. It's all I have left of him. The one thing I can protect, the legacy I can preserve. He turned to face her, and in the low light, his eyes looked almost black. The trustees want me to bring someone to Thanksgiving, to the estate, 4 days, including his birthday. If they see me there with you, settled and stable in the home where I grew up, it'll go a long way towards satisfying their concerns. That's not a performance, Natalie said quietly. I know. He held her gaze. I'm asking anyway. $10,000 bonus and the office space I mentioned. I own a building downtown with empty studios. I'll set one up for you. Proper workspace, everything you need to rebuild your client base. Her breath caught. An office, a real studio, not a corner of a coffee shop or her bedroom. The dream she'd been working toward before Tyler had destroyed everything. Julian, you'd be doing me a favor, and you'd have something that's yours, that no one can take away. Like someone took everything from you already. He didn't say it, but she heard it anyway. Why me? The question that had been burning in her chest for 2 weeks finally emerged. You could hire an actress, someone trained for this, because you need this as much as I do. His hand rose, almost touching her face, then fell back to his side. And because you won't expect more than what's in the contract. You understand that this is business. Did she? Standing this close, she could smell his cologne, something with cedar and sandalwood that made her want to lean closer. She could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes kept dropping to her mouth and jerking away, like he was fighting the impulse to look. What are the rules? Her voice came out softer than intended. Same as now. Separate bedrooms. We're convincing in public, professional in private. This doesn't get messy. Of course not. She forced a smile. Strictly professional. They both knew it was already messier than either wanted to admit. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibilities neither could acknowledge. Natalie thought about the moment earlier when he'd introduced her to the CEO of some tech company, his hand warm on her back, his voice filled with a pride that seemed too real to be manufactured. The way he'd watched her during dinner, like she was fascinating rather than tolerated. I'll go, she heard herself say, to Thanksgiving, to the estate. Something in his expression shifted, relief, gratitude, and underneath it all, something that looked dangerously close to hope. Thank you. But we need rules, Julian, clear ones. We can't. I know. He stepped back, creating distance between them that felt both necessary and disappointing. I'll have Owen draw up an addendum to the contract. Right, professional. Exactly. Neither of them moved. The kitchen lights hummed softly overhead. Outside, the city glittered like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Somewhere in the building, a door closed with a distant thud. Natalie gestured vaguely toward her room. Yes, it's late. She made it to the doorway before his voice stopped her. Natalie? She turned back. He was still standing by the windows, silhouetted against the night, looking more alone than anyone had a right to be in a penthouse worth millions. You were amazing tonight, not because you played the part well, because you were yourself, and that was more than enough. The words settled around her heart like a warm blanket. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled to her room before she could do something stupid, like cross back to him and ask what would happen if they stopped pretending. The days leading up to Thanksgiving blurred together in a series of moments that felt suspended between reality and performance. Natalie couldn't pinpoint exactly when the lines started to fade, when playing Julian's girlfriend began to feel less like acting and more like inhabiting a parallel life where this could actually be real. It started small. Tuesday morning, she emerged from her room to find him in the kitchen, still in running clothes, hair damp from a shower, making breakfast. Not just coffee, but actual food. Eggs, toast, fruit cut into precise pieces. You cook? She'd meant it as a joke, but he'd looked almost embarrassed. I'm trying. You mentioned you always have breakfast, and I usually just... He gestured vaguely at the coffee maker, then slid a plate toward her. It's probably terrible. It wasn't terrible. The eggs were slightly overcooked, and the toast was unevenly buttered, but she ate every bite while he watched with an expression that suggested her opinion mattered more than any business deal. Wednesday, he took her to the building he'd mentioned. The studio space was on the 4th floor, an open loft with exposed brick and massive windows that flooded the room with natural light. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, and enough square footage that she could have distinct areas for client meetings and actual work. It needs furniture, he said, hands in his pockets, watching her explore. And you'll want to set it up however works for you, but the bones are good. Julian, this is... She turned in a slow circle, imagining her desk by the windows, her drafting table against the brick, a comfortable seating area for clients. This is too much. It's an investment. You're talented, Natalie. I've seen your portfolio. At her surprised look, he had the grace to look slightly sheepish. You left your laptop open last week. I wasn't snooping, but I saw the design for that restaurant renovation, and I couldn't stop looking. You have a gift for making spaces feel warm and functional at the same time. The compliment landed somewhere deep in her chest and refused to leave. Later, over takeout Thai food eaten sitting on the floor of her empty studio, he'd asked about her process, and she'd found herself explaining her philosophy that good design should make people feel something, should transform a space from merely functional to meaningful. Like what you did with the penthouse, he'd said quietly. I didn't do anything to the penthouse. You put your mismatched mugs in my kitchen, your books on my coffee table, that throw blanket you brought, the one that's probably older than both of us. His smile was soft in the fading afternoon light. You made it feel less like a showroom and more like a home. Thursday evening, the night before they were due to leave for the estate, found them in his study. He'd been teaching her names, showing her photos from family albums, preparing her for the interrogation he promised was coming. But somewhere around hour 2, the conversation had drifted. What did you want to be when you were a kid? She asked, studying a photo of a younger Julian, maybe 8 or 9, covered in mud and grinning with unself-conscious joy. A veterinarian. I wanted to save animals. He laughed at her expression. I was very serious about it, had the whole plan mapped out. What happened? My father explained that Westfields run companies, not animal clinics, and I was young enough to believe that who I was supposed to be mattered more than who I wanted to be. He took the album from her, closed it gently. What about you? An artist. I used to draw constantly. People, places, anything I could see. My parents bought me this massive sketchbook for my 12th birthday, told me to fill it with dreams. The memory made her throat tight. After they died, I couldn't draw anymore, not like that. So I shifted to design instead, still creating, but with rules and structure. Safer. Maybe you just needed time. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. Voice of experience? I haven't been in my father's study at the estate in 3 years. Can't make myself open the door. His hand rested on the desk between them, close enough that she could have reached out and touched it. Some losses, we just learn to carry them differently. The vulnerability in his admission made her brave. Tell me something true, something you've never told anyone. He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I'm terrified of Thanksgiving, of seeing him like that, of having you see him like that, of those 4 days at the estate where I have to pretend I'm fine with trustees and relatives who are circling like vultures, waiting for me to fail. His eyes met hers, and I'm terrified that this, whatever this is between us, is going to get complicated, and I won't know how to fix it when it does. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Julian, your turn, something true. I haven't felt safe since my parents died, not really. I've been in survival mode for 3 years, just trying to get through each day. She swallowed hard. Until I moved here. Until you. This is the first place that's felt like I could breathe again. The space between them seemed to shrink and expand simultaneously. His hand moved, just barely, just enough that his fingers brushed hers. Neither of them pulled away. We should get some sleep, he said, voice rough. Early flight tomorrow. Right, yes, but neither of them moved. Natalie, her name in his mouth sounded like a question and an answer at once. We have rules, she whispered. We do. This can't get messy. It can't. He leaned forward anyway, or maybe she did. Later, she wouldn't be able to say who moved first. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. She could see the war in his eyes, the way he was fighting himself, fighting this. Her breath caught. His gaze dropped to her mouth. The air felt electric, charged with possibility and danger. Danger in equal measure. His phone shattered the moment, buzzing violently against the desk. He jerked back like he'd been burned, grabbed it without looking at the screen. This might be important. Of course. She stood quickly, smoothing her hands down her jeans. Good night. She made it to her room and closed the door before pressing her back against it, heart racing like she'd run a marathon. Through the wood, she could hear his voice, distant and professional, handling whatever crisis had called. That night, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling and tried to convince herself that the almost kiss had been a mistake, that the way he looked at her was just good acting, that the warmth spreading through her chest when he smiled was just gratitude for the help he was providing. She failed at all 3. In the morning, they loaded into a car that would take them to a private airport, then on to the estate. Julian was back in full CEO mode, crisp button-down, perfectly styled hair, expensive watch that probably cost more than she used to make in 6 months. The distance he'd maintained since last night felt like a physical thing between them. But when they arrived at the estate, sprawling and old-money elegant and more than a little intimidating, and he saw her hesitate at the base of the stairs leading to the entrance, his hand found hers. "Stay close to me," he murmured, and she realized he was just as nervous as she was, just better at hiding it. The double doors opened to reveal a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd already judged Natalie and found her wanting. Behind her, 3 men in expensive suits waited with varying expressions of skepticism. Julian's hand tightened around hers. "Gentlemen, Mrs. Langley," he said, his voice carrying an authority that made her spine straighten in response. "This is Natalie Parker, my girlfriend." The gauntlet, it seemed, had been thrown. The Westfield estate was a monument to generations of accumulated wealth, all stone and tradition, and the weight of expectations built into every carefully maintained corner. Natalie felt it pressing down on her the moment she crossed the threshold. The portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls, the antique furniture that probably cost more than most people's houses, the crystal chandelier overhead that cast fractured light across marble floors. Mrs. Langley's handshake was perfunctory and cold. "Miss Parker, I've prepared the master suite for you both. I trust you'll find it adequate." The way she said it made clear she hoped they wouldn't, that she was already cataloging Natalie's flaws for later discussion. The three men introduced themselves with similar coolness. Richard Hastings, Victoria's father, with shrewd eyes that assessed her like a balance sheet. George Pemberton, whose smile didn't reach his calculating gaze. And Edward Westfield, Julian's uncle, who looked at his nephew with undisguised resentment. "Quite a surprise, Julian," Richard said, his tone suggesting it was anything but pleasant. "We'd heard you were seeing someone, but you didn't believe it?" Julian's arm slid around Natalie's waist, pulling her against his side. The gesture was possessive and protective at once. "I assure you, it's very real." "We'll see," Edward muttered, loud enough to be heard. The tour of the house was a test disguised as courtesy. Mrs. Langley led them through rooms that felt more like museums, each one pristine and unwelcoming, while making subtle comments about how the estate had been in the family for 4 generations, how tradition was everything here, how important it was that Julian's future wife understood the weight of the Westfield name. Wife, not girlfriend. The correction was deliberate, and from the tightening of Julian's jaw, not appreciated. "Father is in the sunroom," Mrs. Langley said, her tone shifting to something almost gentle. "He's having a good day today. Perhaps Miss Parker would like to meet him." The sunroom was all windows and soft light, plants carefully arranged to create an illusion of garden even in late November. William Westfield sat in a wheelchair, a blanket over his legs, despite the warmth, staring out at the manicured grounds beyond. At 68, he still carried himself with a dignity that his condition couldn't erase, though Natalie could see the fragility in the tremor of his hands, the vacant quality to his gaze. Julian's entire body had gone rigid beside her. She squeezed his hand, felt him take a breath before moving forward. "Dad." His voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "I brought someone to meet you." William turned slowly, and Natalie watched clarity slide into his eyes like dawn breaking. "Julian, my boy." Then his gaze found her, and he smiled with unexpected warmth. "And who is this lovely young woman?" "This is Natalie, my girlfriend." "Natalie." William held out a shaking hand, which she took carefully. His grip was weak but sincere. "You have kind eyes. Not like those vultures who keep circling around here." He shot a pointed look toward the door where Mrs. Langley had retreated. "Always with their agendas and their expectations." "It's wonderful to meet you, Mr. Westfield." "William, please. Tell me, what do you do, Natalie?" She found herself relaxing as she described her design work, her plans for the studio. William listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions, laughing at her story about a client who'd wanted their office to look like a spaceship. He had Julian's sense of humor, buried under years of business formality, and she could see where his son had gotten his unexpected warmth. "You make him happy," William said suddenly, his hand reaching for Julian's. "I can see it. You look at him like he's more than a name and a company." Julian's fingers laced through his father's, his throat working. "She is, Dad. She's the best thing that's happened to me in years." The rawness in his voice made Natalie's chest ache. This wasn't performance. This was a son with his father, making the most of borrowed time. Then William's expression shifted, confusion sliding across his features like a cloud obscuring the sun. "Margaret, is that you? I thought, where have you been?" "Margaret, Julian's mother, dead for 20 years. "No, Dad, this is Natalie. Mom's..." His voice cracked. "Mom's not here. Not here. But I just..." William looked around, disoriented, his clarity fragmenting before their eyes. Why can't I remember?" "It's okay." Julian's voice was steady despite the pain in his eyes. "You're safe. I'm here." Natalie watched him guide his father through the confusion with practiced patience, her heart breaking for both of them. When William finally dozed off, exhausted from the effort of remembering and forgetting, Julian stood abruptly and walked to the windows, his shoulders rigid. She went to him, put a hand on his back, felt the tremor running through him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This is what it is now. Moments of him, scattered between hours of nothing." He turned to face her, and his eyes were devastated. I'm losing him by degrees, and I can't stop it. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around him. He resisted for half a heartbeat, then folded into the embrace, his face buried in her hair, his arms tight around her waist. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other up, the pretense forgotten. "Thank you," he breathed against her neck, "for being real, even when everything else is performance." Before she could respond, Mrs. Langley's voice cut through the moment. "Dinner is in an hour. I've laid out appropriate attire in your rooms." They separated quickly, but not before Natalie caught the calculation in the housekeeper's expression. She'd seen the embrace, would report it to the trustees as either proof of authenticity or evidence of impropriety, depending on which served her purposes. The master suite turned out to be one room with one massive 4-poster bed. Natalie stared at it while Julian checked his phone, both of them carefully not acknowledging the elephant in the room. "I'll take the couch," he said finally. "That's ridiculous. The bed is enormous. We can share it like adults." "Natalie, we both need sleep. You especially, if you're going to survive dinner with those people." She grabbed her bag and headed for the bathroom. "I'll change in here. You take the bedroom. We'll put pillows between us if it makes you feel better." Dinner was exactly as miserable as Julian had predicted. The formal dining room could have seated 20, but the 6 of them, Julian, Natalie, Richard, George, Edward, and Mrs. Langley, clustered at one end like mourners at a funeral. Crystal and china and silver that had been in the family for generations, each piece a reminder of legacy and expectation. Richard dominated the conversation, steering it toward business while ostensibly asking about Natalie. Where had she gone to school? What was her family background? How exactly had she and Julian met? "At a hotel," she said, keeping her voice pleasant. "I was having a terrible day, he bought me coffee, and somehow we ended up talking for hours. It was unexpected." "Unexpected," Richard repeated, loading the word with skepticism. "Quite a coincidence. You needing help and Julian providing it." "Careful, Richard." Julian's voice was dangerously soft. "Your implications are showing. I'm simply pointing out that 6 weeks is very fast to be, what was Mrs. Langley's word? Settled? Some people know what they want." Julian's hand found Natalie's under the table. "I'm not interested in wasting time on relationships that don't matter." "And this one matters?" Edward leaned forward. "Enough to bring her here, to your father's home? To parade her in front of us like she's already part of the family?" "She is here because I want her here. Because when I'm with her, I remember what it feels like to be something other than a CEO or a Westfield." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "She makes me better. That's all you need to know." The declaration hung in the air, and Natalie couldn't breathe. He was looking at her, like the trustees didn't exist, like nothing existed except the 2 of them. That night, lying in the massive bed with a wall of pillows between them that felt more symbolic than protective, Natalie stared at the ceiling and listened to Julian's breathing in the darkness. They'd changed in silence, moved around each other with careful courtesy, and climbed into opposite sides of the bed like it was a demilitarized zone. But sleep wouldn't come. The house was too quiet, too full of ghosts and expectations, and she was too aware of him. The warmth radiating from his side of the bed, the subtle shift of sheets when he moved, the way his breath hitched slightly, like he wasn't sleeping either. "Natalie," his voice cut through the dark, "are you awake?" "Yes." "I'm sorry about dinner. They had no right to interrogate you like that." "It's fine. I've handled worse." She turned her head on the pillow, could just make out his silhouette in the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. "Your uncle really doesn't like you. Edward thinks the company should have been his. He's never forgiven my father for being older, for being better at business, for having everything he wanted." A pause. "He'll do anything to take it from me." "Even if it means destroying what your father built?" "Especially then. Some people would rather burn down an empire than see someone else rule it." She wanted to reach across the pillows, take his hand, offer comfort. Instead, she gripped the sheets and kept her distance. "Tell me something. Why does it feel like we're not pretending anymore?" The question hung between them, dangerous and honest. She heard him shift, the rustle of fabric. "Because we're not." His voice was rough with admission. "I don't know when it stopped being performance, but it did, and I don't know what to do about that." Her heart hammered. "Julian." A sound cut through the moment, a low cry, distressed and confused. Julian was out of bed in seconds, pulling on the shirt he'd discarded. "That's my father." She followed him down the hallway to William's room, where they found him sitting up in bed, disoriented and frightened. A nurse was trying to calm him, but he was calling for his wife, for his son, lost in a memory that didn't match his reality. "I'm here, Dad." Julian sat on the edge of the bed, taking his father's trembling hands. "I'm right here. You're safe." "Julian?" William's eyes focused, then unfocused. "There's something. I can't. The company. You have to protect it. Promise me." "I promise. I can." "Won't let them take it. Your mother would be so proud of you." Tears tracked down William's weathered face. "I'm sorry I pushed so hard. Sorry I made you think you had to be perfect. You just had to be happy." "I know, Dad. I know." Natalie watched from the doorway as Julian held his father through the confusion, murmuring reassurances until William finally settled back to sleep. The nurse thanked them quietly and suggested they get rest, but Julian stayed, sitting in the chair beside the bed, holding his father's hand like he could anchor him to the present through touch alone. She went to him, put her hand on his shoulder. "Come back to bed. The nurse is here. He's safe." "I can't. What if he wakes up again and I'm not here?" "Then we'll come back. But you need sleep, Julian. You can't help him if you're exhausted." He let her pull him up, guide him back to their room. This time when they climbed into bed, the pillows stayed on the floor. He lay on his back, staring at nothing, and she curled on her side facing him. "When I was 10, he said quietly, "I broke my arm falling out of a tree. My father left a business meeting in Tokyo, flew 18 hours to be at the hospital. He told me that's what you do for people you love. You show up, no matter what. And now, he doesn't even remember my name most days. But sometimes he does, and those moments, they matter." Do they? Or do they just make it harder, knowing what we're losing? Both. That's what makes love complicated. She reached across the space between them, found his hand. But it's still worth it. His fingers laced through hers, holding tight. "How did you do it? After your parents died, how did you keep going?" "I didn't, at first. I spent 6 months just existing, going through motions. Then one day, Priya dragged me to a museum, and there was this installation about grief, and the artist had written that loss doesn't make you less, it just makes you different. You carry them with you, but you keep moving." Her thumb traced circles on his palm. "Your father is still here. You get to keep showing up. That's a gift, even when it hurts." He turned his head to look at her, and in the darkness, his eyes were liquid and raw. "You're extraordinary. You know that? I'm really not." "You are. You walked into my life with nothing but 2 bags, and more dignity than anyone I've ever met. You faced down Victoria and the trustees, and this whole suffocating world without flinching. And you make me feel like maybe I'm more than just the company, more than just my father's son." "Julian?" His name was barely a whisper. He rolled toward her, closing the distance until they were breathing the same air. "Tell me to stop. Tell me this is a bad idea." "It's a terrible idea." "That's not telling me to stop." "I know." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "If I kiss you right now, everything changes. We can't go back to the agreement, to the rules, to pretending this is just business. I don't want to go back." The admission broke whatever restraint he'd been clinging to. He kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. His other hand slid into her hair, angling her head as he deepened the kiss, and she pressed closer, her fingers clutching his shirt, her heart racing so fast she thought it might escape her chest entirely. This wasn't the almost kiss from his study. This was certain and desperate and real. This was a choice they were both making. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "We should talk about this. Figure out what it means. Tomorrow. We'll figure it out tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he agreed, and kissed her again. They fell asleep tangled together, her head on his chest, his arm around her waist, the night wrapping around them like a promise and a threat in equal measure. Morning came too soon, pale light filtering through the curtains. Natalie woke to find herself still curled against Julian, his fingers drawing absent patterns on her shoulder. And for a moment, everything was perfect. Then reality crashed back in. Thanksgiving Day, the dinner, the performance, and they'd just made everything infinitely more complicated. "We should," she started. "I know." But neither of them moved. A sharp knock on the door made them spring apart. "Breakfast is in 30 minutes, Mrs. Langley called through the wood, her tone suggesting she knew exactly what she was interrupting. "I trust you both slept well." The emphasis on both was pointed enough to draw blood. "Well," Julian said, running a hand through his thoroughly disheveled hair, "so much for discretion." Natalie laughed despite herself, then sobered. "What do we do now?" "Get through today, survive dinner with my father and the trustees, then we figure out what this," he gestured between them, "means for everything else. Simple." "Absolutely." His smile was crooked. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, everything. Thanksgiving dinner was held in the formal dining room, expanded to accommodate not just the trustees, but a collection of business associates, old family friends, and various relatives who'd crawled out of the woodwork for the occasion. 20 people crowded around the table, all of them watching Julian and Natalie with varying degrees of interest and suspicion. William was there, wheeled in for the occasion, his eyes vague and distant. He smiled when he saw Julian, but didn't seem to recognize him, which Natalie could see cut deeper than any business betrayal. Halfway through the meal, Victoria arrived. She swept in like she owned the place, which, given her family's expectations, she probably thought she did. White cashmere dress, diamond earrings, and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Julian, darling, I hope you don't mind. Daddy invited me. Said it wouldn't be Thanksgiving without family." Her gaze landed on Natalie with the precision of a missile strike. "And you brought your little friend? How sweet." Victoria took command of the dinner with the ease of someone who'd been groomed for exactly this role. She directed conversation, laughed at appropriate moments, and made subtle digs at Natalie that were phrased as compliments, just pointed enough that only the target felt the blade. "I love how confident you are, Natalie, wearing something so simple. Not everyone can pull off understated." A pause waited with meaning. Or afford not to. Julian's hand found Natalie's under the table, squeezing tight enough that she could feel his anger vibrating through his skin. But what could he do? Make a scene at his father's Thanksgiving dinner? Give the trustees exactly the evidence of instability they were looking for? After dinner, while the men retired to the study for brandy and business talk, Victoria cornered Natalie in the hallway, under the pretense of showing her the portrait gallery. "You're good," Victoria said once they were alone, her false sweetness evaporating. "I'll give you that. You've got Julian actually believing this is real. It is real. Please, you've known him for what, 2 months? I've known him his entire life. I know how he takes his coffee, what he dreams about, the way he touches that watch when he's nervous. Did he tell you that?" Her smile was sharp. "I know everything about him. You're just a temporary distraction. If you're so certain of that, why are you here? Because distractions can be dangerous if left unattended, and because I wanted to give you a chance to walk away with some dignity." Victoria's ice blue eyes were calculating. Julian needs someone who understands his world, someone who can handle the pressure, the expectations, the spotlight. Can you honestly say that's you? The words hit harder than they should have because Natalie had been asking herself the same question. She thought of the studio, the contract, the practical reasons that had brought them together. Was Victoria right? Was she just fooling herself into believing this could be more than a business arrangement? "He cares about you," Natalie said quietly. "Maybe not the way you want, but he does. And that's supposed to make me feel better? That he's wasting his affection on someone completely inappropriate?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "You'll hurt him. Maybe not intentionally, but you will. Because you can't give him what he needs: stability, legacy, someone who belongs in his world. And when you leave, I'll be there to pick up the pieces. I always am." Natalie wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat, because underneath Victoria's venom, there was a truth she couldn't quite deny. She didn't belong here. Not really. And eventually, Julian would realize that. She made it through the rest of the evening on autopilot, smiling and nodding while the trustees made their assessments and the relatives whispered behind their hands. Julian kept trying to catch her eye, but she couldn't look at him without Victoria's words echoing in her head. That night, back in their room, he tried to pull her close. "Hey, talk to me. What did Victoria say?" "Nothing important." The lie tasted like ash. "Natalie, I'm just tired. It's been a long day." She turned away, creating distance that felt like a chasm. "We should sleep." She felt him hesitate, felt the moment he decided not to push. He stayed on his side of the bed, and the space between them was filled with everything they weren't saying. The weekend ended with excruciating politeness. They rode back to the city in near silence, the easy intimacy from before Thanksgiving replaced by careful formality. At the penthouse, they moved around each other like strangers, and Natalie hated it but didn't know how to fix it. 2 days later, Julian's phone rang at 3 in the morning. She heard him take the call in his study, his voice low and tense. When he emerged an hour later, his face was carefully blank. "That was Richard Hastings. He has photos from Thanksgiving. Us together, the way we look at each other. He's threatening to investigate, to prove that I'm paying you, that this whole thing is a fraud." The words landed like physical blows. "What?" "He gave me an ultimatum. End things with you publicly, or he goes to the other trustees with evidence that I'm manufacturing a relationship to manipulate them." Julian's jaw was tight. "If they believe him, I lose everything. The company, my father's legacy, all of it. So end it." The words came out harder than she'd intended. "That was always the plan anyway, right? 8 weeks, then we go our separate ways. We're almost there. Is that what you want?" What she wanted was for him to fight, to tell her that the contract didn't matter anymore, that what they had was worth the risk. But he just stood there, looking at her with exhausted eyes, and she realized he was already pulling away. "I think it's what's best." Her voice was steady, even as her heart shattered. "For both of us." He nodded slowly. "I'll have Owen draw up the final paperwork. You'll get everything we agreed on. The full payment, the studio, everything. I keep my promises, Natalie. I know you do." The meeting in his office 3 days later was brutal in its formality. Owen was there, along with stacks of paperwork. Julian was in full CEO mode. Expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, the warmth she'd glimpsed completely locked away. "The contract has been fulfilled," Owen said quietly, sliding documents across the polished desk. 8 weeks as agreed. The final payment of $60,000 will be transferred to your account today. The studio space is yours, lease paid for 2 years. And Julian has added a severance bonus of $20,000 as thanks for your, he paused, clearly uncomfortable, services. Services. Like she'd been hired help, which technically she had been. Natalie signed where indicated, her hand steady, her heart in pieces. Julian barely looked at her, his signature quick and practiced. "You're free to remain in the penthouse until you find other accommodations," he said, his voice professionally distant. "There's no rush. I'll be out by the end of the week." She stood, gathering her dignity like armor. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Westfield." The formality made him flinch, but he recovered quickly. "Thank you, Miss Parker. I wish you the best with your future endeavors." She made it to the hallway before the tears started, made it to the elevator before they became sobs. made it to Priya's apartment before she completely fell apart. I'm an idiot, she told her best friend, curled up on the worn couch that had seen her through so many crises. I fell in love with him, actually, genuinely fell in love, and he paid me off like a business transaction. Oh, honey, Priya wrapped her in a hug. He's the idiot. You stay here as long as you need. We'll get through this. The days blurred together in a haze of heartbreak and forced normalcy. Natalie threw herself into setting up the studio, into rebuilding her client base, into pretending that she was fine. The money in her account was life-changing. The studio space was everything she dreamed of. She should have been grateful. Instead, she missed him with an intensity that terrified her. Missed his dry humor and unexpected kindness. Missed the way he looked at her like she was something precious. Missed waking up next to him and feeling, for the first time in years, like she was home. Tyler's text came on a rainy Tuesday, 3 weeks after she'd left the penthouse. Heard about your breakup. I'm sorry. Coffee sometime? Just as friends. I owe you an apology. She should have ignored it, should have blocked his number like she'd done a dozen times before. But she was lonely and hurting, and the thought of a familiar face, even one that had caused her pain, was somehow appealing. They met at a coffee shop near her new studio. Tyler looked good, clean-cut, apologetic, his charm dialed up just enough to seem sincere. I was a jackass, he said, his eyes earnest. What I did, sabotaging your career like that, it was unforgivable. I've been in therapy, working on my issues, and I wanted to make amends. Tyler, I'm not asking for anything. I just want to help if I can. My firm has a contract available. Big budget, perfect for your style. I recommended you. The offer was tempting. Security, a major client, validation that she could succeed on her own merit. Why would you help me after everything? Because I'm trying to be a better person. And because you deserved better than what I gave you. He smiled, and for a moment, she remembered why she dated him in the first place. Let me take you to dinner. We can discuss the details. Just dinner, Natalie. No pressure. She agreed because she was tired of being alone, tired of looking at her phone, hoping for a message that never came. Okay, just dinner. But Julian saw the social media post. Priya had tagged the location without thinking. Tyler's hand visible near Natalie's coffee cup. The caption innocent, but the implication clear. In his penthouse office, Julian stared at the photo until Owen walked in and found him white-knuckled and shaking. That's Tyler, her ex, the one who sabotaged her. So go get her. Owen's patience had clearly run out. Stop being a coward and go get your girl. I paid her off, Owen. I looked her in the eye and handed her a check like she was an employee, a transaction. Yeah, you screwed up, massively. But you screwed up because you were scared, not because you didn't care. Owen grabbed his coat. Now you can either sit here feeling sorry for yourself, or you can fix it. The restaurant was upscale and intimate, exactly the kind of place Tyler would choose to make an impression. Natalie sat across from him, half listening to his pitch about the contract, while her mind wandered to a penthouse across town and a man who taught her that safety and love didn't have to be mutually exclusive. Tyler reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I've missed you, Nat. I know I don't deserve another chance, but Tyler, I can't. She pulled her hand back gently. I appreciate the apology, and if the contract is real, I'm interested professionally. But anything else, I'm not ready. Because of Westfield? His expression shifted, sympathy sliding into something harder. Come on, everyone knows that was fake. Some arrangement he cooked up to impress the board. You're better than being someone's paid girlfriend. The words stung because they hit too close to truths she'd been trying not to examine. But before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant. Natalie. She turned to find Julian standing 3 feet away, looking like he'd run here, hair disheveled, tie loosened, something wild and desperate in his gray eyes. Her heart lurched. What are you doing here? Stopping you from making a mistake. His attention shifted to Tyler, cold and cutting. You sabotaged her career, destroyed her reputation, and you think showing up with a convenient contract makes that okay? Tyler stood, his charm evaporating. This is none of your business, Westfield. You had your chance. You paid her off and walked away. The worst decision I've ever made. Julian's eyes came back to Natalie. Can we talk, please? 5 minutes? She should have said no, should have protected herself from more heartbreak. But the raw vulnerability in his expression made her chest ache. I'm busy, Mr. Westfield. The formality was a shield, and from the way he flinched, it hit its mark. Don't. His voice dropped. Don't call me that. Not you. What else should I call you? You made it clear we were employer and employee, a transaction. She stood, needing the height, the distance. You ended it. You handed me a check and dismissed me like you were someone I could afford to lose, because I was terrified of how much you meant to me. He stepped closer, and she could see he was trembling, because I was falling in love with you, and I didn't know how to handle that without destroying everything. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and devastating, and everything she'd wanted to hear 3 weeks ago. Tyler made a sound of disbelief. You're seriously going to fall for this? He's manipulating you, Natalie. Stay out of this, Julian said, without looking away from her. This is between Natalie and me. No. Natalie's voice was steady, despite the tears threatening. He's right about one thing. You did pay me off. You looked me in the eye and made what we had feel like a business deal. Do you have any idea how that felt? I know. God, I know, and I'm so sorry. His hands clenched at his sides like he wanted to reach for her but didn't dare. Richard threatened to expose everything, said he'd prove you were just an employee, that I was manipulating the trustees. I panicked. I thought pushing you away would protect you, protect what my father built. But all I did was destroy the best thing that's ever happened to me. So you're here now because, what? You got jealous? She gestured at Tyler. Because you saw a photo and decided you wanted me back? I'm here because I haven't been able to breathe right since you left. Because the penthouse feels like a mausoleum without you in it. Because I've been going through the motions of my life while the only thing that mattered walked away. His voice cracked. I'm here because I love you, Natalie. Not the version you performed for the trustees, not the arrangement we had. You. The woman who puts mismatched mugs in my kitchen and makes me laugh and looks at me like I'm more than a name and a company. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You broke my heart. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it if you let me. He took another step closer. I don't want your performance. I don't want a contract or an arrangement. I want you in my life because you choose to be there, because you want to be there. I want to wake up next to you and argue about furniture and support your dreams the way you supported mine. I want real, Natalie, with you, only you. This is ridiculous, Tyler interjected. Natalie, you can't seriously. Get out. Her eyes didn't leave Julian's. The contract was fake, Tyler. Thank you, but no, I'm not interested. Tyler left with a curse and a slammed door. The other diners were staring, but Natalie barely noticed. Her entire focus was on the man in front of her, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. I was falling in love with you too, she whispered. And when you handed me that check, it felt like you were saying that's all I was worth to you. Money, a transaction, not what we actually had. I'm an idiot. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth. A coward who nearly lost everything that matters because I was too afraid to risk it. But I'm here now, and I'm asking, begging for another chance. Let me prove that you're not a transaction. Let me prove that what we have is real. How? How do I know you won't panic again when things get complicated? Because I'm choosing you over everything else. Richard can threaten all he wants. Edward can scheme. Victoria can... He stopped, something like a smile crossing his face. Actually, Victoria told her father to back off. She came to my office last week and said she wouldn't marry someone who was in love with someone else, that she had too much pride for that. She did? She did. The threats are gone, Natalie. The company transfers to me at the New Year's gala regardless. I don't need you for the trustees anymore. His hands came up to cup her face, thumbs brushing away her tears. I just need you. Because I love you. Because you make me better. Because the thought of spending my life without you is unbearable. Julian, I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I hurt you. But I'm asking anyway. His forehead touched hers. Please, let me prove I can be the man you deserve. She kissed him, pulled him down, and kissed him with everything she'd been holding back for 3 weeks. The love and the hurt and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. He responded like a man who'd been drowning and finally found air, his arms wrapping around her, holding her like he'd never let go again. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he was smiling through his own tears. I love you, he said again, like he needed her to hear it, to believe it. I love you too, you idiot. She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. But if you ever hand me a check like that again, never, God, never. I'd rather lose the company than lose you. He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. Come home with me, please. We'll figure everything else out, but just come home. I need more than words, Julian. I need to know this is real, that you're choosing me because you want to, not because of guilt or fear of being alone. Then let me show you. He pulled back, his eyes serious. Give me a week, 7 days. If I haven't convinced you by then, I'll walk away. But I won't, because you're it for me, Natalie. You're everything. She found herself nodding, hope unfurling in her chest like spring after a long winter. 1 week. Show me this is real. He did better than that. The next morning, she woke in her room at Priya's to find an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a lease agreement for Parker & Co., but the building was different, larger, and the plans showed not just her studio, but an entire community arts center. Ground floor gallery space for local artists, affordable workshop rooms, her private studio on the top floor with windows that overlooked the entire city. The note was in his handwriting. This is yours. No strings, no contracts, no conditions. Whether you forgive me or not, whether you come back or not, this is yours. You told me once you wanted Parker & Co. to honor your parents. I want it to be for them. For you, for every artist who needs a space to create. The building is at 447 West Street. I'll be there every evening at 7 if you want to see it. If you don't come, I'll understand. But I'll still be there, waiting. Yours, Julian. She went that evening, her heart in her throat. The building was more beautiful than the plan suggested, all light and space and possibility. And on the top floor, in what would be her studio, she found him. He stood at the windows, hands in his pockets, and when he heard her footsteps, he turned with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror. You built me a studio, she said. I built you a dream. The studio was just the start of it. He moved toward her slowly, like she might bolt. The gallery downstairs will feature emerging artists. The workshop spaces are priced below market rate, so people who need them can actually afford them. There's a small cafe on the ground floor. I thought maybe Priya might want to run it, but that's your call. He was close now, close enough to touch. I don't want to give you my world, Natalie. I want to help you build yours. She kissed him then, unable to wait another second, kissed him until they were both laughing and crying, until the last of her defenses crumbled and she let herself believe that this was real, that they were possible.